personal one. If I happen to sound weird, I don't think I do, but I just had 2 teeth taken out, so luckily I feel pretty okay. My tongue still feels numb. Anyway, just if I sound weird. But yeah, today we're gonna get a bit personal. I unless you know me for some time, you wouldn't notice, but I did cut contact with my family, and the big reason being, there was basically at the end of the day a lot of like emotional neglect and just when I like talked about my problems, it was always somehow my fault, or why haven't I done this yet, or I was always like the black sheep of the family. If you've heard of those, toxic family terms, I was always the black sheep that never fit in to begin with anywhere in the family. Like my one sibling was daddy's girl, the other was mommy's girl, and mommy and daddy were split up. Wasn't really on either of their sides. Kind of saw them both be ridiculous when it came to like pointing fingers at each other. You know, so yeah, that I know that this is a big conversation right now, and a lot of people talk about this, and a big thing that comes up, a big thing that's came up for me during these conversations, and especially during like the holidays, is feeling guilty because my family, my mom especially provided food, shelter, toys, like the food and shelter, sure, that's like super required, but like especially because like she provided toys and like good experiences, like taking us to Disney World a couple times, and like birthday parties and things like that. Like it made me feel like whenever people are like, oh, the food and shelter, that's like the bare minimum, you know, I felt like, well, okay, they provided that, so I guess they did their job technically, right? And maybe you've thought that if you've had a similar situation with your own family before. I, opened a discussion about it on Reddit, just like any of these other videos, and here's, like the points that I got from that conversation, and I want to share them and discuss them here. Alright, so basically, the first point kind of tying into, what I'm sure y'all have heard before. The bare minimum doesn't earn you a medal. It doesn't earn you a reward. Like, a big theme you'll hear here is they basically chose, however much, they were truly planning to have a kid. They chose to give birth to you. And, like, there are rare situations, not so rare, unfortunately, but there are situations where, it wasn't consensual, and like, like for some reason you couldn't get an abortion, those happen, but for the most part, most parents executed some level of choice when choosing to, bring your birth to term, so they don't deserve like a medal for doing those bare minimum things of like keeping you fed and protecting you from the elements. But then I kind of brought up the point I was struggling with because my parents did provide like toys and things that they technically didn't have to provide for survival, and basically because my big problem was like they didn't provide like emotional support. I mean, that even though we don't usually talk about it as such, emotional support should be considered, a bare minimum about, like what a parent should provide. Like, I won't, I didn't expect to win all the arguments. I just wish I was truly heard and not just like, have what I was saying, like be constantly dismissed or spoken over, like that was the big issue. Um, so yeah. Alright, okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. And a big thing that helped me actually when I was deciding if, you know, when I was originally deciding whether I should actually cut ties with my family, is like the therapist I worked with at the time, she basically said, okay, are the good points, are the positive memories, like if you take the positive and negative memories, um, like it was negative worth the positive, and especially at the point that I was at, I had to say no. Like it wasn't worth, like I had already thanked them for the good that they, did provide in my life, and so, that was stuff that they chose to do. So all the bad stuff, kind of in that sense, like there's more kind of emphasis on the bad stuff if they've never acknowledged that was truly awful, because like they did the nice things for you, like providing food, shelter, clothing, like they provided that, and we thank them, in various ways, like through our life, but if there's still a lot of like ongoing bad stuff, like the good stuff doesn't override it like that. And something that someone said that I could really relate to is like they quoted this movie or TV show, and basically the point of it was like a lot of us, who had parents who were, emotionally available, they would one way or another, or in multiple ways, show us, they talk to us like, oh, you didn't do this thing right, you suck at this, like you never remember to do this, you never do this, and yet they swear up and down in one way or another that they really love us, and we're family. And for a lot of people who grew up in an environment like that, me included for a time especially, like it's too scary for us to think that it's too scary for us to like redefine how we understand love, so that we accept that what love really means to us, like how we were raised at home, doesn't really qualify. Like the way that our problems got treated, in my case, like it doesn't really fit that definition. And I think that was a big thing, especially as I really watched a lot of anime, where some of them were kind of centered around, like they weren't like Disney movies. They didn't like have super like in your face messages about family, but like they did show what it looks like when people are close, as far as like when people can trust each other, when people like they help each other grow. They they don't like always like not point out flaws, but like they actually care to see that through, to like be like, hey, you did that thing. and just like acknowledging their mistakes when their mistakes are brought to them. Like most characters are gonna like acknowledge that in some kind of appropriate way, and I just didn't grow up in an environment like that, and anime really helped me, define those different things for myself in a way that felt like like comfortable, like understandable. So since my parents, like, since my home life wasn't really adhering to that, you know, it that all the more, and like friends who similarly grew up with anime helped me all the more understand that it wasn't a great, it really wasn't a great idea to stick around. Not everyone, was like that. I did have some friends who, kind of played that classic, some version of like, family's all you have, like, you should like work things out. Like I've had anime fan friends like say similar things, and like a lot of people have told me, like, oh, you should just, make up with your family, or, you can take your time to heal, but then, maybe you'll, like, go back to, talking to your family, and I'm like, no, because, like, I realized even before I left, I mean, I was pretty much in my, as my dad at one point said, I was in my own little world, and like, not to say like I didn't need them, because I certainly, needed them for like to provide food, when I couldn't afford it because I wasn't in college, or I was in college and I wasn't, working, or couldn't support myself, I will always be thankful for having a childhood where I was, like I was supported financially. That feels weird to say, and I would, just cause I don't know, it just feels weird. Just that phrase just feels weird to say. And I was given toys, food, shelter, and my mom would hug me and be like, "Oh, I love you," and it's like, okay, but then when shit gets real, it's like, my perspective certainly isn't considered. And I mean, that's been a pattern as far as like, the situations I found myself in. Like, very rarely have people like advocated for, how shit impacted me. Even when I've stood up for myself, which is, usual for me, and I would like be like, hey, but what they did hurt me, even if I reacted in a strong way, I was dealing with them for like days and days and days, for example, like, like if I was dealing with a bully, and they're like, that was wrong, but this is about you yelling in the class was disruptive, and like, or, some version of that, like them focusing on like, that little thing that they caught, That's why I don't immediately doubt people who kind of feel like they're always being wrong, because like some of them probably are just really unlucky as far as like the other person's actions don't get caught. So yeah, or like for whatever reason the other person's actions just kind of get downplayed. But I'm kind of going off on a tangent there. Alright. Okay. A big thing is it's okay to feel like you deserve more, as like in my case, like emotional acknowledgement, and like I deserve not to be like emotionally neglected, so it's like I don't I almost kind of I worry that someone in my family is gonna watch this and be like, "What do you mean? Give us examples." And I don't want to extend this video by like putting out like examples, and I don't want to like involve other people like that. So, sorry, but I did speak up for myself. I was good at advocating for myself whenever something was going wrong, but too many times like it didn't really mean anything to y'all. So um but yeah, something I really had to like something I went through a journey to understand is like I deserve how I feel that way for a reason, and it's not wrong to feel how I feel, when I can, especially when I can point to many examples of why I feel the way I feel, without any expanding the truth, so it's okay to feel how you feel, and that's really important when breaking out of any toxic relationship. Sorry, I'm looking through my notes. Okay. Another point is that when parents hold the money they spent, feeding you and sheltering you over your head, that's manipulation. Like, it's kind of on the same boat as like, I grew up watching like a family where I grew up, close to a family where like the father of the family would be very abusive as far as like lots of spanking and fear of his punishments running the house, for the kids, like, and but he would spoil the kids for Christmas, and it was like that's how they get you, that's how they manipulate you to be like, okay, I don't like the abusive part, I can acknowledge it's abuse, but now it's all complicated and stuff because they give me good things for Christmas, and they take us on trips, or going out to dinner, and doing all the stuff kids deserve, like all the stuff like, sorry, kids enjoy but also deserve, but just to live a good life. Everyone deserves a good life, I got to have that too, and my parents weren't like abusive, physically, just a lot of emotional shit. But yeah, like they would, like my mom especially would try to hold, what she provided to like guilt trip, and it's just, I don't know, manipulative. It's like if your kids aren't helping you clean, I mean, guilting them into it is definitely not the healthiest way to do it, even if it worked, I get parents can get really tired, but that's essentially what I grew up with. You don't your parents struggling to handle like their child raising situation isn't an excuse for them to neglect you, like they should have something they could at least try to like improve their situation, so it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be your job to just deal with, whatever they put forward if it's not truly enough. Okay, alright, and making sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Another thing someone said to consider is they could have bought you those toys so they didn't have to deal with your emotions, so they didn't have to deal with you. I don't think you know, like that's the case with my own family because my mom did, often complain about us not spending enough time together, and she'd rather just, do stuff that didn't cost money. That was a thing she would vent about sometimes is that, why can't we do things that don't cost money? Why can't we go to the mall and just window shop and like not spend money? So I can understand that definitely, but like, I'm just saying like some people might be in a situation where their parents really did only buy toys so that their kids could entertain themselves, but I don't, I think my mom genuinely wanted to buy toys that we'd enjoy, so we could have fun. Like she worked a regular 9 to 5 and had a long commute, so if anything, it's to keep us busy. So like we weren't like bored during the summer especially, but yeah, like you may have that situation with your parents, but I wouldn't say that applied to me. Okay, reading. Okay, so here's another thing, right? You can both acknowledge that your parents did good things like taking you on vacations, giving you food, shelter, and toys. You can acknowledge those good things, and like I said in the past, like you could thank, you should thank them for those things. Definitely thank them for those things, and you could be like, when I needed like emotional support from them, they weren't there. But you can hold, like, it's a challenge, but we have to learn for people who ended up in these situations. We have to learn to hold both these truths basically. So yeah. Reading. And so yeah, it's not bad to have that kind of split mentality to, respect the good and the bad. They gave life to you, they chose to bring you in here. You didn't have a say in that, and all you owe them is like decent human respect that you give to any human. Like they're the ones who are responsible for keeping you alive because they chose to, give birth to you. It's a bit of a transactional way to think about it, but it makes it so you're not, really getting into the emotional weeds of like, how much do I owe them because they brought me into this world and, kept me safe for, decades. Like, that was their choice. And if something I heard elsewhere, sorry if you hear the motorcycle, but if you raise your kids, and they actually want to give that back to you, to like take care of you in your old age, that's how you know you did, things pretty well. Like you don't have to be perfect, like your kids shouldn't expect you to be perfect, but if you raise them well, like they'll actually want to take care of you in their older age. Like no guilt tripping needed, nothing needed. But because there are people out there who truly, have it in their mind, like, rightfully so. Like my parents raised me, like, and they were always there for me, to offer a shoulder to cry on and all those other things. And the least I could do is like, return that favor once they're getting older and make sure they don't have anything to worry about, like in a senior home, or like, make sure they never end up at a senior home if at all possible, because they took care of us and we like being around them, so it'd be fine if they live with us or something like that, like just operating in that way, mentally. Um, do, 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 do. Another perspective is it, and this works for many things like that you may be working through, but if a friend, told you about like your about like your parental situation, but you're hearing it be the situation of another person, like your friend, how would you respond? Like, if they were saying, like, I don't, I feel so bad for leaving my parents, even though they, were never actually there for me. Like, what would you tell them? Just imagine, the phrasing you would use to explain your situation. Imagine saying that to somebody who cared about you, and see, maybe not your siblings, but, see, or maybe it could be your siblings, just, you can argue that they feel the same way, just, either way, see, what the other person thinks, see, you can actually tell somebody, just like a summary of, your dilemma, or just role play with yourself, like, tell yourself, like, about, like, these different things. You can, like, keep it short, because the details about it. You don't need to, like, write it down or anything, and you will be able to go from that, you will be able to explore, like, what does this look like from as much of an outsider point of view as you can really construct. Hopefully that made sense. Okay. Alright. Mistreating a kid after choosing yourself to, like, bring them into this world, mistreating them emotionally is all the more unforgivable, because a lot of people argue, having a kid is a selfish choice. Like, you chose to have this kid, like, the kid never said they wanted to be born, I can't really say for sure if I'm, like, truly happy I was born. Not, kind of getting even deeper, but it's like, because of my ADHD and autism, I've struggled to make friends, and I have friends, most of them are, like, online friends who live elsewhere. My hearing problems that, I was both born with and also, developed over time, like, my hearing problems make it really hard to connect with people. No matter, even if I, do all my hygiene stuff and brush my hair and stuff, if I can't make friends super easily, because I can't connect with people very easily, because they're always in some loud place, so I can't really connect with people, like, but it was always blamed on, like, oh, I'm not taking enough showers, which, that there's some truth to that, but there are also other problems, so there's that. Okay, and also, this is a similar argument that's brought up with like, physical child abuse. Like, if your partner or your boss, treated you the way that, your parents treated you, like, emotionally, would that be a relationship you'd want to uphold? Because that, looks the same whether it's a romantic relationship, platonic relationship, familiar relationship. If someone's, emotionally, treating you poorly, would you stay? Would you imagine any sane person to stick around for that? So that's another thing too. Alright, thanks for bearing with me. Okay. So when I started this post on Reddit, I basically talked about how you know, my parents didn't want to deal with my feelings, you know, and they gave a sense of like, oh, you know, like it's inconvenient you feel that way because we really want to do whatever, you know, or we really think whatever, and you know, arguing against that is kind of inconvenient. I mean, I'm thankful I never lost kind of my own individual thinking capabilities. Like I never just truly, completely, you know, stood in line and, you know, just went along with everything without any kind of objection in my brain, you know, cause like when you are able to have your own opinions and your family makes you feel like, you know, those are inconvenient feelings, you know, that's even if subtle, that's a, you know, that's an example of rejection. Like they're basically rejecting you, you know, like that's, you know, that's how I'd always felt. Like they may like me, they may love me as like, you know, their middle kid, but they don't like the Nyako, you know, they don't like, you know, the side of me that's actually me, that's actually unique. They just want, you know, their middle child to be, you know, part of the family and like, you know, helping out the family, dropping everything, even if, even if, you know, no matter what, like no matter how that person is feeling or going, what they're going through, you know, inside or out, you know, so that doesn't end well, as you can see. Alright, you know, kind of going back to what I said about, you know, some people, you know, treating like going no contact as like a temporary thing. Like, I know it is for some people, you know, because one person was like, oh, just go to therapy and deal with these things, and maybe you'll feel like returning to your family. My OCD flares up every time I even think about that, you know? Like, no, we've been past that because they could never respect any boundary I put up, you know, without getting mad about it, without shaming it. Nope. Can't, you know, won't go back. That would be the end of me. I seriously feel like that'd be the end of me, you know? Like, alright. And no one's 100% evil, but you don't have to keep them in your life, you know, because that was a big thing I struggled with, you know, like that, kind of as evident throughout this video, like, my parents weren't, you know, the most evil people out there, but, you know, it doesn't mean that, you know, especially as an adult, I was exactly happy that they were still in my life after everything that happened, you know? And that's something to consider, you know? Like, even if your parents, you know, even if you hear other people talk about parents who feel like way worse than how your parents were, you know, it doesn't, you're an adult, I presume. So, you know, you get to choose, just like with anybody else at this point, assuming you live on your own, you know, and you're survival on your own. Like, you get to choose if you still want them in your life, you know? That is a legit choice that everyone gets to make. Some people don't have to think about it because they don't have homes with their parents, but people like us do, you know? And that is a valid choice to make. You know, you don't gotta stick with your family just because they're blood, you know? Like, and lastly, a little more of a silly one, but very much true. We provide food, shelter, and toys to our pets. Humans need more than food, shelter, and toys to survive. So, you know, hopefully I've given you things to think about if you're in that path of deciding if to go no contact, or, you know, you've got no contact and on some level and you feel real guilty about it, here are things to consider to hopefully help ease, whatever uncertainty or help you at least process it. Hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe, comment if you could relate, ring the bell if listening to me talk is somehow fun.